What would you do if the people you trusted most were planning to destroy you? I am 55 years old. I built a construction company from nothing, just my own two hands and 30 years of hard work. 340 employees, schools, hospitals, homes across Pennsylvania. Everything I have, I earned with sweat and honest labor. Then my wife Margaret passed away. The woman I had loved for 31 years, the partner who stood beside me through every foundation poured and every contract signed. She was gone, and I thought my world had ended. I was wrong. My world was just beginning to collapse. While I grieved, my own family was meeting in secret. My daughter-in-law, Sabine, my son Corbin, my CFO, Brent. They had a plan. They would forge documents showing I was mentally unfit. They would transfer my company into their names. They would steal everything while I was still crying over my wife's grave. The signs were small at first. A locked filing cabinet. Strange phone calls that ended when I walked into the room. My own son avoiding my eyes at family dinners. Then I found the real evidence. Financial records that did not add up. Signatures that were not mine on contracts I had never seen. Millions flowing through shell companies. And the truth about my grandson, who was not my grandson at all. They thought a grieving widower would be an easy target. They thought I would never fight back. They were wrong about everything, because when my daughter-in-law slid that gold pen across the boardroom table and demanded I sign away my company, I had already prepared my answer. And 4 federal agents were waiting just outside the door. To understand what happened in that boardroom, I need to take you back to the beginning. Thank you for being here with me. Before we begin, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment and tell me, have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely? Just yes or no. Your perspective matters more than you know. A quick note, some details are fictionalized for storytelling. Any resemblance to real people is coincidental. The lesson is what truly matters. The mahogany conference table stretched before me like an executioner's block, polished to a mirror finish that reflected faces I used to call family. Sabine slammed the legal documents down hard enough to make the water glasses tremble. Now that the old woman is gone, she said, you will put the company in my son's name and fend for yourself. I am Preston Mercer, 55 years old. These calloused hands drew blueprints for half the commercial towers dotting the Philadelphia skyline. I built Mercer commercial infrastructure from a pickup truck and a dream into a $38 million enterprise. And now my daughter-in-law stood across from me in her tailored suit, demanding I surrender it all. Sabine Mercer was 36 years old, every inch of her expensive. From the Italian heels to the diamond studs that caught the fluorescent light. She had married my son Corbin 8 years ago, and I had welcomed her like a daughter. That welcome was rotting in my stomach now. You are done here, Preston, she continued, sliding the documents closer. It is our turn now. Behind her stood Corbin, my own son, 34 years old, wearing a suit I had paid for. Standing in a building my sweat had constructed. He could not meet my eyes. He had not been able to meet them since the funeral. What kind of person demands paperwork while the funeral lilies still perfume the air? I said nothing. I simply folded my hands on the table, feeling the grain of wood I had selected myself when we built this headquarters 12 years ago. And I smiled. Not the smile of a beaten man, not the smile of surrender. The smile of a man holding cards no one else at that table could see. Sabine's confidence flickered. Just for a moment. Just enough. The boardroom doors swung open. Cecil Harrington walked in without announcement or apology. 57 years old, silver-haired, with the deliberate stride of a man who had spent 20 years prosecuting white-collar criminals before retiring to private practice. He crossed the room in silence, reached into his briefcase, and dropped a certified document directly in front of Sabine. The paper hit mahogany like a gunshot. Sabine's face went pale, then red, then something I had never seen before, afraid. But to understand how we arrived at this moment, you have to go back 6 days. Back to a silent kitchen and a cold cup of coffee. Back to the morning, everything started to unravel. 4 days after Margaret's funeral, I stood alone in our kitchen holding her favorite cup, the blue ceramic one with the chipped handle she refused to throw away. Morning light streamed through windows she had picked out 30 years ago, casting shadows across empty chairs where our children used to sit for Sunday breakfast. The silence was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat echoing off the granite counters Margaret had chosen. The house had become a mausoleum. Every room held her ghost, her reading glasses on the nightstand, her cardigan still draped over the living room chair, her handwriting on the grocery list stuck to the refrigerator. The coffee cup was cold. Everything was cold now. I had been standing there for 20 minutes, maybe 30, when the doorbell rang. Sharp, insistent, wrong for 7 in the morning. Wrong for a house in mourning. Wrong in a way that made the hair on my arms stand up. I set down Margaret's cup and walked to the front door. Sabine stood on my porch in a tailored black suit, heels clicking against the stone as she shifted her weight. In her manicured hands, she clutched a thick manila folder. No flowers, no casserole, no sympathy card. "I need to discuss something urgent with you, Preston," she said. Her voice was clipped, professional, the voice she used in boardrooms, not with family. Company business. She did not say she was sorry for my loss. She did not ask how I was holding up. She did not mention Margaret's name. She simply walked past me into my home as if she already owned it. I watched her heels click across the hardwood floors Margaret and I had refinished ourselves the summer Corbin graduated high school. I watched her scan the living room like an appraiser calculating value. I watched her set her designer purse on the kitchen counter where my wife's ashes had sat just 3 days before. "Where is Corbin?" I asked. "Working. Someone has to keep the company running while you grieve." She said the last word like it was a disease, an inconvenience, a temporary obstacle to her plans. She had brought her own pen as if there was no possibility I might refuse. Sabine set the folder on the counter. The label, printed in bold black letters, read, "Emergency Power Transfer Agreement." She smiled at me then, the smile of a predator who smells weakness, who sees a grieving old man alone in an empty house, vulnerable and broken and ready to be consumed. What she did not know, what none of them knew, was that some wolves only pretend to limp. I looked at the folder. I looked at my daughter-in-law's confident smile. And somewhere deep in my chest, beneath the grief and the exhaustion and the weight of 55 years, something ancient and dangerous began to wake. The documents inside that folder would reveal just how far they had already gone, and how much further they were willing to go. Sabine's manicured finger tapped the signature line with the patience of a woman who had already counted her winnings. I opened the folder and began to read. "The bid deadline is Monday at 9, she said, her voice smooth as polished marble. "Without your signature transferring authority, we lose the Harrison County school contract. $12 million. Preston, gone. $12 million. The biggest contract Mercer Commercial Infrastructure had ever pursued. I had spent 6 months preparing that bid, reviewing every specification, calculating every cost. And now Sabine stood in my kitchen 4 days after my wife's funeral, demanding I hand it all to her husband. "You're grieving," she continued, softening her tone the way salespeople soften when they sense resistance. "Let us carry this burden for you. Corbin knows the business. He's ready. I looked at my son standing behind her. Corbin, 34 years old, wearing a tie I had bought him for his birthday. He examined his shoes like they held the secrets of the universe. He had not looked at me once since walking through my door. How long had they been planning this? Since the diagnosis? Since the wedding? I need time to review these documents, I said, keeping my voice level. Come back tomorrow. Sabine's smile flickered. Tomorrow may be too late. The board needs tomorrow. I closed the folder and set it on the counter between us. I buried my wife on Tuesday. Sabine, you can give me one more day. She opened her mouth to argue, then thought better of it. Perhaps she sensed that pushing harder would only make me push back. Perhaps she simply decided patience would serve her better than force. Of course, she said sweetly. Family first. They left without another word. Corbin still had not met my eyes. That afternoon, I went searching for Margaret's life insurance documents in my study. The filing cabinet was organized by year, each drawer holding the administrative residue of a life well lived. I found the insurance folder easily enough. Margaret had always been meticulous about paperwork, but tucked behind it, in a section I had not touched in months, I found something else. A bank transfer authorization form. Amount, $200,000. Destination, an account number I did not recognize. And at the bottom, in blue ink, my signature. Except I had never signed it. I pulled the document closer to the window, tilting it toward the January light. The forgery was impressive, close enough to fool a casual observer. Close enough to clear a bank's verification process. But I'd signed my name on blueprints and contracts for 30 years. I knew my own hand the way a musician knows their instrument. The pen pressure was wrong. I always pressed harder on downstrokes, a habit from decades of drafting tables and engineering drawings. This signature was too light, too careful. Someone had traced it. 3 weeks ago. The date stamped in the corner said, 3 weeks ago. I had not left Margaret's hospice room in 48 hours straight during that time. She had been slipping away, and I had held her hand through every labored breath. Someone had forged my name while my wife was dying. I sat down heavily in my chair, the paper trembling slightly in my grip. $200,000. Where had it gone? Who had authorized this? And more importantly, what else had been done in my name while I stood vigil at my wife's bedside? The questions multiplied like cracks spreading through concrete. Each answer I needed seemed to spawn 3 more mysteries. I spent the rest of the afternoon searching my files. Nothing else appeared obviously wrong. But that only made the single forgery more sinister. A careful thief takes just enough to escape notice. A confident one takes only what they think they can explain away. At 11 that night, I stood on the balcony off my bedroom, unable to sleep. January wind cut through my robe, carrying the smell of frozen earth and bare trees. The estate grounds stretched out below me in moonlight. 10 acres Margaret and I had purchased when the company finally turned profitable. Back when our children were young, and our dreams still felt possible. The phone rang. Not my cell phone, my private landline, a number I had kept for 30 years, known to perhaps a dozen people in the world. I walked inside and picked up the receiver. "Don't sign anything this week." The voice was distorted, electronically altered. But something in the cadence tugged at buried memory. Smoke-filled conference rooms. Numbers that never quite added up. A colleague who had noticed the same discrepancies I had, back when noticing such things could end a career. Not a single document. "Who is this?" The line was already dead. I stood there holding the phone, the dial tone humming against my ear. January wind still rattling the balcony doors. Someone out there knew what was happening inside my company. Someone who remembered the old days, when loyalty was rarer than gold, and the people who watched the books had to watch each other. The caller had known about Sabine's documents, known about the pressure, known I might be desperate enough or grieving enough to sign away everything without reading the fine print. Whoever they were, they had just told me I was not as alone as I thought. By morning, I would discover just how thoroughly my own family had already locked me out. The warning from last night's mysterious caller echoed in my mind as I drove to headquarters before dawn. Someone was watching. Someone remembered. I intended to find out who before my own family discovered I was looking. The security panel flashed red before my keycard even touched the sensor. I stood there in the pre-dawn darkness, my executive keycard. The same card that had granted me access for 23 years, rejected like a stranger's forgotten badge. The security guard behind the desk. A man named Walter, who had worked here since we moved into this building, looked at his screen with visible discomfort. "I'm sorry, Mr. Mercer." He would not meet my eyes. "The system says your credentials are suspended." Suspended? I kept my voice level. "Walter, I built this building." "I know, sir." His eyes dropped to the floor. "I can't override it. The authorization came from executive management." Executive management. My son. The son who could not look at me yesterday while his wife demanded my signature. "When was the change made?" "Yesterday afternoon, sir, around 4 o'clock, while I was searching my files for forged documents. While I was discovering how thoroughly they had already begun to erase me." The lobby doors opened behind me, bringing a gust of January wind and a cloud of expensive cologne, cedar and musk, overpowering enough to announce its wearer before I even turned around. Preston. Brent Holloway strode across the marble like he owned the place. 42 years old, dressed in a suit that cost more than most workers' monthly salaries, with a smile that never quite reached his calculating eyes. He had been our CFO for 11 years. Hired at Corbin's insistence despite my reservations about his flashy demeanor. "I heard there was some confusion at the gate." "Confusion isn't the word I'd use, Brent." He chuckled as if I'd made a joke. "Just a routine security migration. Corbin wanted to ensure data protection during your—" He paused, selecting his words with theatrical care. "Leave of absence." "I haven't taken a leave of absence." "Not yet." His smile widened. "But given everything you've been through, no one would blame you for stepping back. The transition team can handle things until you're ready." 23 years of building this company. And now, the front door treated me like a stranger. "What transition team?" "Just temporary restructuring. Very standard during leadership changes." Brent glanced at Walter, then back at me. "Why don't you go home? Preston, rest. Grieve. We'll have this sorted out in a few days." I studied his face, the practiced sympathy, the hint of triumph he could not quite conceal. Brent had always been too smooth, too polished. Margaret had never trusted him. She used to say his cologne arrived 5 minutes before he did. I left without another word. Sometimes the smartest move is letting your enemies believe they have won. At noon, I drove to Corbin's house with groceries. Not because the children needed food. Sabine made sure the refrigerator was always stocked with organic everything. But because a grandfather bringing provisions raises no suspicions. The housekeeper let me in without question. How many other doors had they already closed while I sat beside Margaret's hospital bed? I found my grandchildren in the playroom. Ingrid, 12 years old with her grandmother's sharp eyes, hugged me tighter than usual. Miles, 16, barely looked up from his phone. The difference in their welcomes told me something about which child had overheard what conversations. "Grandpa, are you okay?" Ingrid whispered. I'm fine, sweetheart. I kissed the top of her head. Just missing your grandmother. I put the groceries away, talked to the children for an hour, and then excused myself to use the bathroom. Instead, I walked into the laundry room. Corbin's coat hung on a hook by the utility sink. The same coat he had worn yesterday when he stood behind Sabine like a silent accessory. I checked the hallway, listened for footsteps, then began a systematic search. Left pocket, car keys. Loose change. Right pocket, receipts from restaurants I did not recognize. Inside breast pocket, nothing. Then something fell from the lining seam, a small object that clinked against the tile floor. A ring. I picked it up and held it to the window light. White gold, substantial weight. A sapphire stone in an antique setting. Custom work, clearly expensive. The kind of piece a man gives when he wants to make a statement. I turned it slowly, looking for markings. Inside the band, 2 letters were engraved in flowing script. Not S.M. Not Sabine Mercer. 2 initials that did not belong to anyone in my family. I stood in that laundry room, holding evidence of yet another secret my son had hidden from me, breathing in fabric softener while the washing machine hummed its oblivious rhythm. A ring hidden in a married man's coat pocket. A ring that did not belong to his wife. Someone else was woven into this web. Someone whose initials I did not yet recognize. I slipped the ring back into the coat's lining exactly as I had found it. Some secrets reveal themselves better when you let them breathe. Some hunters do their best work when the prey believes it is safe. I smoothed the jacket flat, checked my appearance in the hallway mirror, and rejoined my grandchildren with a smile. That evening, I would discover just how far they had gone while I buried my wife. The ring's initials haunted me through dinner, through the evening news I did not watch, through the silence of a house that felt less like home with each passing hour. By 9 o'clock, I could not avoid it any longer. I needed documents. I needed answers. I needed to enter the room I had been avoiding since we buried Margaret. The study still smelled like her. Lavender hand cream, old leather books. The particular scent of a woman who had spent 30 years making this space her sanctuary as much as mine. I stood in the doorway, my hand on the light switch, unable to move forward. Her reading glasses sat on the desk, folded neatly, waiting for eyes that would never need them again. The novel she had been reading, some mystery she had promised to tell me about when she finished, lay open beside them. Spine cracked at page 212. She would never finish it now. She would never tell me who the killer was. I had not cried at the funeral. I would not cry now. There was work to do. I crossed to the far wall where a family portrait hung in an ornate gilded frame. Margaret and me on our 25th anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren, all of us smiling as if the future held nothing but promise. I swung the portrait aside on its hidden hinge, revealing the wall safe behind it. The keypad glowed green, waiting for input. I entered the code I had used for 28 years. June 15th, 1996, our wedding anniversary. The day Margaret became a Mercer. The safe beeped red. I tried again, more carefully this time. 6 digits. The same 6 digits I had entered 1,000 times. Red. A third attempt. Slower still. Checking each number as my finger pressed it. Deny. I stepped back from the safe, my mind refusing to process what my eyes were telling me. I had built empires. I had survived recessions, betrayals, competitors who wanted me destroyed, but standing in my dead wife's study, unable to open my own safe, I felt something I had not felt in decades, powerless. Someone had reprogrammed the code. Someone with access to my home, my private spaces, my most secure documents. The safe contained our wills, insurance policies, stock certificates, the deed to this house, everything that proved who owned what in the Mercer estate. I pressed my palm flat against the cold metal door, as if I could feel who had violated it. The keypad's red glow seemed to mock me. Who else had been in this room? What else had they touched while I was choosing casket flowers? I forced myself to think systematically. The code had been unchanged since we installed the safe in 1998. Only 2 people in the world knew that combination, Margaret and myself. She would never have shared it, not with the children, not with anyone. It was our private fail-safe, our final layer of protection. But Margaret was gone. And dead women cannot guard secrets. Then I remembered. Margaret kept a backup. She had always been more cautious than me, more aware that memory could fail in emergencies. In a private address book, the leather-bound one she had carried since before we were married, she kept all our important codes, written in her own shorthand, account numbers, PIN codes, safe combinations. The address book lived in her nightstand drawer, the drawer in our bedroom, the room I had barely entered since the paramedics wheeled her body out. I walked slowly down the hallway, each step heavier than the last. The bedroom door stood slightly ajar, exactly as I had left it 3 days ago. I pushed it open and crossed to her side of the bed. Her pillow still held the indent of her head, a ghost impression I could not bring myself to smooth away. The nightstand drawer slid open with a soft whisper of well-oiled wood. Her address book was there. The familiar leather cover, worn soft by decades of handling, lay in its usual spot, among receipts and reading glasses, and the small devotional she read each morning. But the spine faced the wrong direction. I picked up the book with hands that trembled despite my efforts to steady them. Margaret was meticulous, obsessive about order. She placed everything with the spine facing outward, aligned with the drawer's edge. She had done it that way for 30 years. This book was upside down. The spine faced inward. Someone had taken it out, read it, and put it back without knowing how she kept things. Someone had been in our bedroom, in our most private space, searching through my dying wife's belongings, while I sat beside her hospital bed, holding her hand. They had done it while she was still warm. I sat down on the edge of our bed, holding the violated address book like evidence at a crime scene, because that is exactly what it was. My home had become a crime scene, and my own family were the suspects. The ring in Corbin's pocket, the forged signature, the lockout at headquarters, the reprogrammed safe. Each discovery pointed toward a conspiracy so thorough, so patient, that it must have been planned for months, perhaps years. Before dawn, the hospital would call with news that would crack everything wide open. I had not slept. The violated address book lay on the nightstand like an accusation, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw phantom intruders moving through my home, while Margaret drew her final breaths. I was still sitting on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, when the phone screamed at 5:40 a.m. The kind of ring that only brings bad news. The kind that cuts through darkness like a blade.
Mr. Mercer.
A woman's voice, professional but urgent. This is Jefferson University Hospital. Your grandson Miles was brought in 20 minutes ago. Suspected ruptured appendix. He's being prepped for emergency surgery. My heart stopped. We need family here immediately. There may be complications. Every conspiracy, every suspicion, every betrayal, none of it mattered now. My grandson was bleeding. I was in my car within 3 minutes, backing out of the driveway before the engine fully warmed. The pre-dawn streets were empty, streetlights casting pools of orange across silent intersections. I ran every red light between Bryn Mawr and Philadelphia. Miles Mercer, 16 years old, a boy who had never known hardship, never worked a day in his life, never understood what it meant to build something from nothing. He spent his time on video games and social media, showed little interest in the family business, and communicated mostly through grunts and shrugs. But he was my grandson, my blood, and he was on an operating table, fighting for his life. I had spent 2 days cataloging their betrayals. Now my hands shook because a 16-year-old might not survive the night. The steering wheel was slick under my palms. I had not driven this fast since Margaret's first stroke warning 3 years ago. That race had ended in relief, a false alarm, the doctor said. Just stress and dehydration. I prayed this one would end the same way. Jefferson University Hospital loomed against the lightening sky, its emergency entrance blazing with fluorescent light. I abandoned my car in the loading zone and ran. Corbin and Sabine were already there, huddled in plastic chairs in a surgical waiting area. Corbin looked up when I arrived, his face gray, his tie loosened. Sabine sat rigid beside him, clutching her designer handbag like a lifeline. "What happened?" I demanded. "He woke up screaming around 4, Corbin said. His voice was hollow. "We thought it was food poisoning at first. Then he started vomiting blood. The doctors say they caught it before it fully ruptured," Sabine added quickly. "He's in surgery now. They expect a full recovery." I sank into the chair beside them, my legs suddenly weak. Relief washed through me. Then something else. Something harder to name. What kind of grandfather notices his daughter-in-law's body language before asking about his grandson's vital signs? But I had noticed. Sabine was scared. Yes, any mother would be. Yet there was something else in the tightness around her eyes, something that did not match a routine appendectomy. A door opened at the end of the corridor. A surgeon emerged in blue scrubs, mask pulled down around his neck. Dr. Bernard Fletcher, according to his ID badge. 50-something, salt and pepper hair. The calm efficiency of a man who had delivered bad news 1,000 times. "The Mercer family." We stood in unison. "Miles is stable. We're proceeding with the appendectomy as planned." He paused, consulting a tablet. "However, we've encountered a complication. His blood work shows an unusual marker, potentially a hereditary condition that affects anesthesia tolerance. It's rare, but manageable. We need to rule it out before we proceed." "What do you need?" I asked. "Genetic samples from immediate family, specifically the father and paternal grandfather." He looked at Corbin, then at me. "A simple cheek swab from each of you. It will only take a moment." Corbin's face went completely blank. The expression of a man who had forgotten his lines in a play he never wanted to perform. And Sabine. Sabine's hand shot out and gripped the waiting room chair so hard her knuckles turned white. "Is that really necessary?" Her voice was too high, too fast. "He's already in surgery. Can't we just proceed and test afterward?" Dr. Fletcher frowned. "Mrs. Mercer, this condition affects how patients metabolize certain anesthetics. If Miles carries the marker, and we don't adjust the dosage, there could be serious complications. We need to know before we put him under." Sabine was not worried about Miles. She was terrified of the test. The realization hit me like ice water. The ring in Corbin's pocket with the wrong initials. Sabine's fierce insistence that I sign over the company before any questions could be asked. The way Corbin had avoided my eyes since the funeral, not just guilt over the power play, but something deeper, something genetic. "Of course we'll provide samples," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Whatever Miles needs." Corbin nodded mechanically, still staring at the floor. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the air conditioning. The surgeon waited for formal consent. A nurse appeared with swabs and collection tubes, and Sabine looked at me with something I had never seen in her eyes before. Pure animal terror. Not the fear of a mother watching her son go under the knife. The fear of a woman watching her secrets about to be exposed. The nurse approached Corbin first. He opened his mouth like a man walking to his own execution. The preliminary results would arrive before the surgery was even complete. The swabs were taken. The samples were processed. Miles came through surgery without complications. Appendix removed. Prognosis excellent. So why did Dr. Fletcher pull me aside with the expression of a man delivering a death sentence? "Mr. Mercer, may I speak with you privately?" I followed him to a quiet corner of the corridor, away from where Sabine and Corbin sat in rigid silence. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting that particular shade of institutional white that makes everyone look slightly ill. "The surgery went well," Dr. Fletcher began. "Miles will make a full recovery. However, the pre-surgical genetic screening revealed an anomaly we need to discuss." He paused, choosing his words with the precision of a surgeon selecting instruments. "Miles's genetic markers don't align with your son's paternal lineage. In fact, they show zero compatibility with what we'd expect from a father-son relationship." I let the words settle. Somewhere in the distance, a hospital intercom announced a code I did not recognize. A cart wheeled past with rubber squeaking efficiency. The world continued spinning while mine tilted on its axis. "You're saying Miles is not Corbin's biological son?" It was not a question. Dr. Fletcher's gray eyebrows rose slightly. "These tests have a margin of error, of course. We should retest to rule out sample contamination. But in my experience..." He stopped, professional discretion warring with human sympathy. "In my experience, these results don't lie." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like a jury, deliberating a verdict everyone already knew. "I understand," I said. "Please proceed with the retest. And, Doctor, I'd appreciate discretion until we have confirmation." He nodded, the relief of a man who had dreaded this conversation evident in his shoulders. "Of course. I'll have the results by tomorrow morning." I walked back to the waiting area where my son and daughter-in-law sat in their plastic chairs. Sabine was typing furiously on her phone. Corbin stared at the wall like a man watching his own execution. "We need to talk," I said. "Privately." Corbin followed me to an alcove near the vending machines, his footsteps heavy on the linoleum. The instant we were out of Sabine's earshot, I told him what Dr. Fletcher had said. I had expected confusion, shock, the natural reaction of a man who just learned his son might not be his son. Instead, Corbin exploded. "These labs make mistakes all the time." His voice echoed down the corridor, sharp enough to turn heads. "It's contamination. Someone mixed up the samples. I'll sue this entire hospital." "Corbin, no, this is negligence. They're going to destroy my family with their incompetence." His face had gone red, veins standing out on his neck. "I want that technician's name. I want their supervisor's name. I want..." "Have you considered," I said quietly, "that the results might be accurate?" The question stopped him mid-sentence. He stared at me, mouth still open. And in that suspended moment I saw something I had been refusing to see for 16 years. What father, hearing his son might not be his, attacks the messenger instead of demanding answers? A confused man would ask questions. A betrayed husband would demand explanations from his wife. An innocent father would be gutted by the possibility, reaching for any proof that the test was wrong. But Corbin did none of those things. He attacked the lab, the hospital, the technicians, anyone except Sabine, anyone except the one person who would know the truth. "Of course it's contamination," Corbin said, but his voice had lost its fire. "What else could it be?" His voice cracked on the last word, not from grief, not from confusion, from fear. Corbin was not confused. He was cornered. "Tell me the truth," I said. "Have you always known?" "Known what?" but he would not meet my eyes. He stared at the vending machine like it held the secrets of salvation. "Oh, there's nothing to know. The test is wrong." I studied my son, this man I had raised, educated, handed an entire company on a silver platter. The man who had stood behind his wife in my kitchen 4 days ago while she demanded I sign away my legacy. The man who had not met my eyes since the funeral. "You're lying," I said. Not a question, a statement of fact. Corbin's jaw tightened. "You're grieving. You're not thinking clearly. Mom's death has made you paranoid. Your mother has been dead for 6 days. You've been lying for 16 years. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Guilt, terror, desperation. Then the mask came back down, slick and practiced. "I'm going to check on my son," he said, and walked away without another word. I let him go. There was nothing more to learn from his denials. The test would be confirmed tomorrow, and then the questions would shift from whether Miles was his son to whose son Miles actually was. I had negotiated contracts worth millions. I had sat across from liars, cheats, and con artists for 3 decades. I knew exactly what a guilty man looked like when the walls closed in. And right now, my own son wore that face. Not the face of a betrayed husband discovering his wife's infidelity, the face of an accomplice whose carefully constructed secret was finally unraveling. Somewhere in this hospital, a 12-year-old girl was watching and writing everything down. Corbin walked away, and I let him go. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't be confirmed by tomorrow's test results. But as I turned back toward the waiting area, I caught movement behind the vending machine, a flash of dark hair, a notebook clutched against a school uniform. Ingrid, my 12-year-old granddaughter, crouched in the alcove with her composition book open, pen moving furiously across the page. She froze when our eyes met. For a moment, we simply looked at each other. The grandfather who had just discovered a 16-year lie, and the child who had apparently been documenting everything the adults thought was private. "How much did you hear?" I asked quietly. "Enough." She did not look away. Marg's eyes stared back at me from that young face, the same sharp intelligence, the same refusal to pretend ignorance. "I don't understand all of it, Grandpa, but I know what lying looks like. Children see everything. They just learn early not to let adults know they're watching." "That notebook," I said. "What's in it?" "Things people say when they think I'm not listening." She clutched it tighter. "Mom and Dad talk about you sometimes. About the company. About what they're going to do when—" She stopped. "When what?" "When you give up." Her voice was small but steady. "They think you're going to give up after Grandma died." I knelt down to her level, my knees protesting against the cold linoleum. "Ingrid, I need you to keep that notebook safe. Can you do that for me?" She nodded solemnly. "I've been keeping it safe since October." October? 3 months before Margaret's death. My granddaughter had been documenting her parents' conversations for 3 months, sensing something wrong that no adult had bothered to explain. "Good girl," I said. "Go sit with your brother when they let us see him. And keep watching. Keep writing." She slipped past me, notebook disappearing into her backpack with practiced ease. I watched her go. This quiet child who had become an unexpected witness to her family's unraveling. 2 hours later, Dr. Fletcher emerged from the surgical ward with news. Miles was awake, groggy but stable. The appendectomy had been textbook. He would make a full recovery. The family gathered in the recovery waiting area. Sabine, Corbin, Ingrid, and me, arranged in plastic chairs like strangers sharing a delayed flight. Technically together, utterly alone. The waiting room held us in its fluorescent grip. Nobody spoke. Sabine checked her phone obsessively, Corbin stared at the wall. Ingrid sat in the corner, her backpack clutched on her lap, watching everything with those two old eyes. I thought about the ring I had found in Corbin's coat, the forged signature on the bank document, the mysterious caller who had warned me not to sign anything, the safe code that had been changed while my wife was dying. Each thread connected to the others, weaving a pattern I was only beginning to see. And now this, a grandson who was not my grandson, a son who had known the truth and kept it hidden, a daughter-in-law whose terror at a simple DNA test revealed secrets that went deeper than a single affair. Mr. Mercer, Dr. Fletcher had appeared at my elbow, his voice pitched low enough that only I could hear. May I speak with you privately? There's a matter regarding the genetic screening that requires discussion. I thought you said it could be lab error. He glanced toward Sabine and Corbin, then back to me. That's what I said in front of the family. This conversation is different. 4 words that meant everything was about to change. I followed him down the corridor, away from the waiting area. Behind us, I could feel Sabine's eyes tracking our movement through the window. She knew. She had always known. And now she was watching her carefully constructed lies begin to crumble. Doctor, Fletcher led me to a small consultation room, the kind of room where doctors delivered the worst news, with tissue boxes strategically placed and chairs angled for difficult conversations. He closed the door behind us. The preliminary results were not an error, he said. I've run the comparison twice. There is no genetic relationship between your son and your grandson. None. You're certain? As certain as science allows. The formal verification will take another day, but the markers are conclusive. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. Mr. Mercer, in my experience, when families discover results like these, they often want to pursue further testing. To determine, he stopped, to determine who the biological father actually is. Yes. He looked relieved that I had said it, so he did not have to. If you choose to pursue that, I can recommend a private genetic testing facility. Complete confidentiality. Through the consultation room's narrow window, I could see Sabine reaching for Corbin's hand in the waiting area, not seeking comfort, seeking a lifeline. They knew what was being discussed in this room. They knew their secret was being confirmed, documented, made real. Thank you, Doctor. I'll handle the next steps myself. He nodded and left me alone in that small room with its tissue boxes and angled chairs. I had the confirmation I needed. Now I needed proof that would hold up in any court, business or legal. That night, I would collect DNA samples myself, trusting no one else with the truth. I arrived at Corbin's house that evening with soup containers and sympathy. I left with 2 sealed plastic bags hidden in my coat pocket. The soup was Margaret's recipe, chicken and wild rice, the same she had made for every sick grandchild, every recovering neighbor, every friend in crisis. Sabine accepted the containers at the door with the thin smile of a woman who did not want her father-in-law in her house, but could not refuse a gesture of care. Miles is resting, she said. You can see him for a few minutes. Of course. I'll just use the bathroom first. She nodded and retreated to the kitchen. I climbed the stairs with measured steps, my heart beating steady and cold. The master bathroom was immaculate marble counters, spa fixtures, the kind of luxury that Sabine's taste demanded, and Corbin's salary at my company provided. I closed the door softly and went straight to the vanity. Corbin's hairbrush sat beside the sink. I had watched him use it 1,000 times over the years, running it through his hair with the casual vanity he had inherited from his mother. 3 dark strands clung to the bristles, follicles intact at the root. I pulled a plastic bag from my pocket and carefully extracted the hairs, sealing them without contamination. Every motion was precise, deliberate. I had learned patience building this company. Now I was using it to tear apart my own family. 16 years of birthday parties, school plays, baseball games. And now I was stealing hair from a brush to prove it was all a lie. I flushed the toilet for appearances, washed my hands, and walked to Miles's room. He was awake, propped against pillows, scrolling through his phone with the glazed expression of a teenager on painkillers. He looked up when I entered. Those familiar eyes, that familiar face, and I felt the sharp twist of grief I had been suppressing since the hospital. "Hey, Grandpa, how are you feeling?" "Like someone scooped out part of me with a melon baller." He managed a weak smile. "But the drugs are pretty good." I sat beside his bed, adjusting his blanket with my right hand while my left palmed the water glass from his nightstand. In the same motion, I slid it into my coat pocket, replacing it with the fresh glass I had brought upstairs. "Your grandmother would have been here fussing over you," I said. "She would have brought enough soup to feed the whole neighborhood." "I miss her." His voice cracked slightly. "Mom said the funeral was beautiful, but I don't really remember it. Everything's been weird since." "It has." I squeezed his shoulder. "But you focus on getting better. Everything else can wait." I stayed 10 more minutes, making small talk, watching this boy I had loved since the moment Sabine placed him in my arms at the hospital. Whatever the truth was about his blood, I had held him as an infant. I had taught him to ride a bicycle. I had been his grandfather in every way that mattered, but someone had lied to me about it. For 16 years, someone had stolen my right to know the truth. At 1 a.m., I drove through empty highways toward King of Prussia. The radio was off. Just the hum of the engine, the glow of dashboard lights, and 30 years of trust dissolving in the rearview mirror. The highway stretched ahead like a sentence waiting to be completed, every mile bringing me closer to a truth I could not unread. I did not want to believe what I already knew. But belief was not evidence. Evidence was evidence. And evidence was what I would have. Keystone Genomics occupied a nondescript building in an industrial park, the kind of place that advertised discretion more loudly than its actual services. A single light burned in the lobby. I parked and walked to the unmarked side entrance. The technician who met me was a young man in a wrinkled lab coat, maybe 25, with the bored expression of someone who had processed too many midnight samples to ask questions anymore. "Rush processing," I said, setting the sealed bags on the counter. 24 hours, no paperwork with my name on it. He examined the samples through the plastic, nodded once, and pulled out a calculator. 3,000 for expedited, cash. I counted out the bills without hesitation. He watched the money stack up on the counter with the professional disinterest of a man who had seen this transaction 100 times before. "Results will be ready tomorrow night," he said, sweeping the cash into a drawer. "Same time, same door. You'll get a phone call when they're processed." How do you prepare for confirmation of what you already know will destroy everything? I signed nothing. I showed no identification. The technician tagged the samples with a number, not a name, and disappeared into the back. The clock on the wall read 1:47 a.m. 24 hours. I walked back to my car as the lab's fluorescent lights clicked off behind me. The January air bit through my coat, but I barely felt it. In one day, I would hold scientific proof of a 16-year deception in my hands. Proof that my son had known. Proof that his wife had conspired. Proof that my grandson's blood belonged to a stranger. The question was not whether I could handle the truth. The question was what I would do with it. By morning, another threat would arrive, one that made the conspiracy even larger than family. I slept 3 hours that night, my mind cycling through timelines and evidence while the clock counted down toward tomorrow's results. By 7 a.m., I was back at headquarters, navigating the building through back entrances to avoid another humiliating confrontation at security. The envelope was waiting on my desk when I arrived. No postmark, no return address, just my name typed in bold letters that somehow felt like a threat. I had not been in this office in days. Someone had placed this here deliberately, knowing I would find it. My hands were steady as I sliced open the seal. The letter inside was printed on expensive paper, the kind of stationery that costs more per page than most people spend on lunch. No letterhead, no signature. Just a formal acquisition proposal from an unnamed investment group. They were offering to purchase 40% of Mercer Commercial Infrastructure shares at 20% above current market value, a premium that would make any board member salivate. The kind of offer that arrives once in a decade, but the language made my blood run cold. We believe a partnership could protect all stakeholders during this transitional period. The word transitional appeared twice. Recent concerns about financial irregularities appeared 3 times. Given the upcoming bid deadline, appeared once, but once was enough. Someone knew about the bid. Someone knew about irregularities I had not yet discovered. Someone was timing their move with surgical precision. How many fronts could one man fight at once before the ground collapsed beneath him? I set the letter down and stared out my window at the Philadelphia skyline towers I had helped build. Contracts I had negotiated. A reputation I had constructed brick by brick over 3 decades. All of it under assault simultaneously. I pulled out a legal pad and began mapping the connections. Monday, Sabine arrives with succession documents demanding I transfer authority before the school bid deadline. Tuesday, I discover a forged bank authorization signed while Margaret was dying. Wednesday, my building access is revoked. I find a ring in Corbin's coat with initials that do not match his wife. My safe code has been changed. Thursday, Miles's emergency surgery reveals genetic evidence that my grandson is not my grandson. And now a hostile investor arrives with insider knowledge of company irregularities. 4 attacks in 1 week. Either the universe hated me, or someone was running a playbook. The pieces were connecting like blueprints for a building designed to fall with me inside it. The succession documents would give Sabine control of the company books. The investor letter mentioned irregularities. If I signed the transfer, any financial crimes would become my responsibility. I would be the one left holding the bag when auditors came knocking. Someone had been setting this up for months, maybe years. While I attended board meetings and signed contracts and visited my wife in hospice, someone had been constructing a trap with my name on every piece. I spent the afternoon in my office, door locked, analyzing financial reports I had trusted others to summarize. The numbers swam before my eyes. Nothing obviously wrong, but nothing felt right either. I needed help. Professional help. The kind of forensic accounting that could take months, I did not have. At 7 that evening, I drove home through rush hour traffic, my mind still churning through possibilities. Who was the investor? How did they know about the bid deadline? What irregularities had they discovered that I had missed? I was standing on the balcony at 9 p.m., watching the January darkness settle over the estate, when my phone rang. The same private line. The same blocked number. The investor letter arrived today, the distorted voice said without preamble. Don't respond. Don't sell a single share. My grip tightened on the phone. How do you know about the letter? Because I know who sent it, and it's not who you think. Then tell me who it is. A pause. Static crackled on the line like distant thunder. The people attacking you are not all working together. Some of them don't even know about the others. That's what makes this dangerous. You're fighting enemies who don't coordinate because they don't have to. You're the common target, not the common enemy. Who are you? I demanded. How do you know all this? Someone who made the mistake of noticing the wrong numbers 20 years ago. The voice softened slightly. And someone who never forgot what you did when I brought those numbers to you. The line went dead before I could respond. I stood on the cold balcony, phone silent in my hand. January wind cutting through my coat. The caller knew about the investor letter within hours of its arrival. They knew about irregularities I had not discovered yet. They knew exactly when to call and what to say. Whoever was protecting me had eyes everywhere, which meant whoever was attacking me did too. I thought about the voice, distorted but familiar. Someone who had noticed wrong numbers 20 years ago. Someone I had protected when they brought those numbers to me. The memory tugged at the edge of recognition. Too blurred to grasp, but too important to ignore. Tomorrow, the DNA results would arrive, and everything I suspected would become undeniable fact. The 24 hours had passed. The caller's warning still echoed in my mind. Enemies who did not coordinate because they did not have to, all targeting me simultaneously. But right now, sitting in my truck outside Keystone Genomics, only one truth mattered. The envelope weighed nothing. That was the cruelest part. How something so light could carry the power to destroy everything I had built my life around. I sat in the parking lot with the engine off, gray winter light filtering through the windshield. The manila envelope lay on the passenger seat where the technician had placed it. Unmarked except for the case number. No name. No judgment, just science reduced to paper. My hands would not move to open it. I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The face of a man who had aged a decade in a week. The lines around my eyes seemed deeper. The gray at my temples seemed more pronounced. I barely recognized the person looking back at me. Who was I before Margaret died? Before the succession documents and the forged signatures and the genetic tests? I had been a grandfather who believed in his family, a widower who trusted his children, a businessman who thought he understood how the world worked. That man was about to die in this parking lot. I picked up the envelope. The paper felt cold against my fingers, sharp-edged and final. Memories flooded through me unbidden. Holding infant Miles in the delivery room, his tiny fingers wrapping around my thumb, teaching him to swing a hammer when he was 8. Watching his face light up when he drove his first nail straight. Sitting in the bleachers at his high school baseball games, cheering until my voice went hoarse. Does it matter if I raised him? If I loved him, does blood rewrite 16 years of being his grandfather? But someone had lied to me. Someone had stolen my right to know the truth about my own family. And that theft demanded an answer. I tore open the envelope. The report was 3 pages of scientific methodology and sample identifications. My eyes skipped past the technical language, past the chain of custody documentation, past everything except the conclusion printed in bold type at the bottom of the final page. Genetic relationship analysis. Subject A and Subject B shows 0% probability of first-degree paternal relationship. Conclusion. No biological connection confirmed. 0%. Not unlikely, not inconclusive, not within margin of error. 0. The steering wheel blurred in front of me. I pressed my forehead against it, the leather cold and hard, and tried to remember how to breathe. The air came in ragged gasps that fogged the windshield. 16 years. Every birthday party, every Christmas morning, every proud moment I had shared with a grandson who was never mine. The implications cascaded through my mind like dominoes falling. Sabine's affair had not been a moment of weakness. It had produced a child. Corbin had known. His guilty explosion at the hospital proved he had always known. They had all known. And they had let me love a boy while laughing behind my back. They all knew. Corbin's inability to meet my eyes. Sabine's terror at the genetic testing. Even the ring hidden in his coat, initials that belonged to someone else. Someone who had fathered the child I had believed was my grandson. I was the fool who never figured it out. I forced myself to read the full report. The scientific language offered no comfort, no ambiguity. The markers were clear. The conclusion was absolute. Corbin Mercer shared no paternal genetic material with Miles Mercer. Miles was not at fault. He was a child, a teenager who had no say in the circumstances of his conception. He had called me Grandpa and meant it. He had hugged me at the hospital and asked about his grandmother. But he had also been a weapon, a tool used against me for 16 years by people who claimed to love me. I sat in that parking lot for 20 minutes, watching condensation form on the glass, listening to my own breathing in the silence. The grief came in waves, crushing, retreating, crushing again. Then something shifted. The waves stopped. The trembling in my hands went still. I folded the report precisely along its original creases and slipped it into my jacket pocket. Grief is for people who have been wronged. Rage is for people still being wronged. I was neither. I was a man with evidence, and evidence does not cry. I started the engine. The dashboard clock read 6:47 p.m. Outside, the January sky had darkened to purple. Street lights flickering on across the parking lot. I pulled out onto the highway and turned toward Bryn Mawr, toward the house I had shared with Margaret for 30 years, toward the children who had conspired against me, toward the life I had believed in until 7 days ago. It was not home anymore. It was the scene of a crime that had been committed against me for 16 years. The DNA report sat in my pocket like a loaded weapon. The question was not whether I could pull the trigger. The question was how many shots I would need. I was done being the victim. The highway stretched before me, empty in the fading January light. The DNA report sat in my jacket pocket like a tumor I could not cut out. I had driven 5 miles before I pulled onto the shoulder and allowed myself what I knew would come. 60 seconds. That is all the grief I could afford before it curdled into something sharper. I gripped the steering wheel and counted breaths. 1, 2, 3. I let myself feel the weight of 16 years of lies crushing my chest. The birthday parties, the baseball games, the graduation speech where I had called Miles the future of our family. 4, 5, 6. The future of our family. A boy who shared none of our blood. A grandson who was not a grandson at all. 7, 8, 9. At 60, something mechanical clicked inside me. The grief did not disappear. It compressed, hardening into a cold, dense mass behind my sternum. I wiped my eyes once, checked my mirrors, and pulled back onto the highway. The morning was over. Now the work began. My mind shifted into the same mode I used when analyzing a failing construction project. Systematic, methodical, ruthless. If Miles was not Corbin's son, then someone else was the father. Someone who had access to Sabine 16 years ago. Someone close enough, long enough, trusted enough to maintain an affair without detection. How many men had I welcomed into my home, my business, my trust, while one of them was destroying everything from the inside? I began cataloging. Neighbors Tom Driscoll next door was 70 years old when Miles was born. Frank Bennett on the other side had been stationed in Germany. Eliminated. Contractors. Dozens of men passed through Mercer job sites, but Sabine had no contact with them. She stayed away from construction work. Too dirty, she said. Eliminated. Social circle. Country club members. Charity board colleagues. The husbands of her tennis friends. Possible, but unlikely. An affair requires sustained access, repeated opportunity. A tennis match once a week would not provide that, which left the company. My mind worked like a crane operator sorting wreckage. Lift, examine, discard. Lift, examine, discard. Project managers came and went. Accountants rotated through different divisions. Sales representatives traveled constantly. None of them would have had regular access to family events, to holiday dinners, to the intimate spaces where affairs took root. But there was one man who had all of that access. One man who had been at every company gathering, every family celebration, every Christmas party where Sabine appeared in her designer dresses. Brent Holloway. The CFO's face crystallized in my memory. 42 years old now, which meant he had been 26 when he joined Mercer Commercial Infrastructure. Young, ambitious, charming in the way that made older executives nervous, and younger wives laugh too loudly at cocktail parties. I had hired him myself. Corbin had recommended him a college friend who needed a break, who had the financial skills we needed as the company expanded. I had welcomed Brent into my conference room, my boardroom, my home. The timeline fit perfectly. Brent joined the company in February of 2009. Miles was born in January of 2010. 11 months. 11 months of dinners where Brent charmed Margaret with his wine knowledge. 11 months of holiday parties where Sabine seemed slightly more animated than usual. 11 months of a young CFO making himself indispensable to the family while secretly bedding my daughter-in-law. Access, motive, opportunity. The same rules as a job site theft. And Brent Holloway fit every criterion. I thought about the ring I had found in Corbin's coat. The initials that did not match Sabine's. I had assumed it belonged to another woman, evidence of Corbin's own infidelity. But what if the initials matched Brent? What if Corbin had been carrying evidence of his wife's affair, knowingly or not? Brent Holloway. The man who balanced my books had unbalanced my bloodline. I remembered the way he had appeared at the security desk when I was locked out. Too quick, too prepared, his cologne arriving before his explanations. He had been expecting me that morning. He had been ready with his smooth words about security upgrades and transition periods, because he knew what was coming. He had always known. The highway signs announced my exit approaching. I signaled mechanically, my body operating on autopilot while my mind constructed the case. Corbin knew Miles was not his son. His explosion at the hospital had proven that. Sabine knew because she was the mother. And if Brent was the father, he knew too. 3 people. 16 years of silence. While I wrote tuition checks and attended school plays and planned a legacy for a grandson who carried a stranger's DNA. Holloway's face hung in my mind like a target. 16 years he had sat in my boardroom, shaken my hand, called me boss. 16 years he had watched me dote on a boy he knew was his. 16 years of smiling at family dinners while sleeping with my daughter-in-law. I pulled into my driveway as darkness settled over Bryn Mawr. The house lights glowed warm and familiar. But nothing about this place felt like home anymore. Tomorrow, I would find out exactly what else Brent Holloway had been hiding. Holloway's name burned in my mind as I drove to Summit Coffee House in Ardmore the next evening. The mysterious caller had finally agreed to meet in person, promising answers I could not find alone. I needed allies. I needed evidence. And, apparently, I needed to trust a voice I had not recognized for decades. The man in the corner booth looked like someone's grandfather, which made the folder he slid across the table all the more unsettling. Harvey Pemberton, 71 years old, with thinning white hair and eyes that held the sharpness of a man who had spent his life finding discrepancies others missed. He had been my chief accountant for 22 years before retiring quietly in 2018. I remembered his retirement party, the cake, the handshakes, the gold watch. I did not remember the warnings he must have tried to give me before he left. 22 years I balanced your books, he said, his voice low enough that the coffee shop's background jazz covered our conversation. I know where the bodies are buried. Why come forward now? I asked. Why not before? Because now you're finally ready to listen. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup, steam rising between us. Before Margaret died, you would have defended them. You would have made excuses. You would have called me a disgruntled former employee. He was right. I hated that he was right. How many nights had Harvey sat on this evidence, waiting for a man too blind to see what was happening in his own company? When did you start collecting evidence? I asked. Years ago. I sensed something wrong before I retired numbers that didn't quite add up. Invoices from vendors I'd never heard of. But I couldn't prove anything without access to the primary accounts. He tapped the folder between us. So I made copies. Everything I could get my hands on, backed up in 3 different locations, waiting for the day you'd be ready to see the truth. And Margaret's death made me ready. Her death made them careless. Harvey leaned forward. They thought you'd be too grief-stricken to notice, too broken to fight. They moved fast because they thought you were finished. He opened the folder. Spreadsheets spilled across the table, columns of numbers, vendor names, invoice dates. My eyes scanned the pages, looking for patterns, looking for anomalies. Harvey pointed to a highlighted section. $7.2 million, he said. Siphoned from the workers' pension fund over 14 months. Through fabricated subcontractor invoices from companies that don't exist. The numbers blurred before me. $7 million. Stolen from the retirement accounts of the men and women who had built Mercer commercial infrastructure alongside me. 340 families, Harvey continued. Workers who poured concrete in summer heat and framed houses in winter cold. Their retirement savings gone. 340 families. Workers who trusted me to protect what they had earned. Look at the dates, Harvey said quietly. I looked. The first fabricated invoice was dated the same month Margaret received her cancer diagnosis. The theft had begun precisely when I started spending every available hour at hospitals and treatment centers. When I stopped coming to the office. When I trusted my family to run things in my absence. They used her illness as cover, I said. The words tasted like ash. Your son authorized every transfer. Your CFO processed every payment. Your daughter-in-law managed the documentation. Harvey's voice was steady, but his eyes were furious. They worked as a team. Preston, while you were holding your wife's hand in hospice. They were draining everything you built. I sat back in my chair, the coffee shop suddenly too small, the air too thin. The affair, the forged signature, the succession documents, the pension theft, each crime connected to the others, each betrayal building on the last. They had not just stolen from me. They had stolen from everyone who ever believed the Mercer name meant something. Who else knows about this? No one. I've kept it secret for years, waiting for the right moment. Harvey closed the first folder and slid a second one across the table. That's the pension theft. This one is worse. The second folder was labeled in red ink, Restructuring, Confidential. What's in it? What they're planning to do with the company itself. Harvey's jaw tightened. The pension theft was preparation. This is the end game. I opened the folder. The first page was a legal memorandum outlining a corporate restructuring plan. As I read, my hands began to tremble. The plan called for converting Mercer Commercial Infrastructure from a family-held corporation to a publicly traded entity. My shares, my controlling interest, would be diluted through a series of stock issuances. By the time the restructuring completed, I would own less than 5% of the company I had founded. And buried in the fine print, a clause requiring shareholder approval by the bid deadline. The same deadline Sabine had used to pressure me into signing the succession documents. They're not just trying to take control, I said slowly. They're trying to erase me entirely and make themselves rich in the process. Harvey nodded grimly. The pension theft funded the legal preparation. The restructuring makes them millionaires. And the school bid provides the cover story. Every piece connected. Every crime served the next. I closed the folder and looked at the man across from me. This 71-year-old accountant who had waited years to show me the truth. What do we do now? The restructuring documents burned in my briefcase as I walked into an unmarked office building in downtown Philadelphia the next morning. Harvey had arranged the meeting with the mysterious investor, the same one who had sent the threatening acquisition letter. Time to learn who else wanted a piece of Mercer Commercial Infrastructure. The man behind the desk looked like a stranger. So why did his eyes feel like a memory I could not quite place? Cecil Harrington rose to greet me. 70-something years old, silver-haired, with the composed bearing of a man who had spent decades in boardrooms where fortunes changed hands. His handshake was firm, but not aggressive. His smile carried the weight of knowledge I did not yet possess. "I've been watching your company for 30 years, Mr. Mercer," he said, gesturing to a leather chair across from his desk. "Investors don't usually watch that long without acting. Some things require patience." Cecil settled into his own chair, fingers steepled. "Your family tested mine." There was something in the way he said it, "your family," that suggested he knew far more than a typical outside investor should. "You sent the acquisition letter," I said. It was not a question. "I did. Though I suspect you've realized by now that I am not your enemy." Cecil watched me like a man who had already read the last page of my story and was just waiting for me to catch up. "The pension theft, the restructuring plan, the succession documents. You've been busy. How do you know about all that?" "Because I've been waiting for you to discover it." He leaned forward. "Harvey Pemberton has been reporting to me for years. I'm the one who told him to wait until you were ready." The revelation should have angered me. Instead, it clarified things. Harvey had not acted alone. There was infrastructure behind this planning that stretched back further than I had imagined. "Why help me?" I asked. "What do you get out of this?" Cecil's smile faded. "That's a conversation for another day. Right now, you have a CFO to visit." I left Cecil's office with more questions than answers, but also with the certainty that I was not fighting alone. Someone with resources and patience had been positioning pieces on this board for decades. That afternoon, I walked into Mercer Commercial Infrastructure headquarters through the front door. Walter at the security desk practically fell over himself to wave me through. Someone had restored my access, probably anticipating I would eventually sign the succession documents. Brent Holloway's office occupied the corner of the executive floor. Mahogany desk, leather chairs, family photographs strategically placed to project warmth and stability. The same cedar musk cologne that announced his presence everywhere he went. How do you shake hands with the man who may have fathered your grandson? Smile at his jokes, and not wrap your fingers around his throat. "Preston," Brent rose with practiced warmth. "Good to see you. I heard Miles is recovering well." "He is, thank you." I settled into the chair across from his desk, studying the photographs on his shelves. his wife, his children. No pictures of anyone who might explain a sapphire ring with mysterious initials. "What brings you in?" he asked. "I thought you were taking time to grieve." "I've been thinking about the school bid. Harrison County." I kept my voice casual. "Also about running a full pension audit. Transparency for the workers. You know, morale builder." Brent's smile did not waver. "Of course. I'll have the files ready whenever you need them." "Good. I've been reviewing some vendor records." I watched his eyes. "A few names came up that I don't recognize." "Oh. Kellerman Industrial Services. Rayburn Consulting." I let the names hang in the air. Ring any bells? For one heartbeat, maybe two, Brent's composure fractured. His eyes widened a fraction. His jaw tightened. Fear flickered across his features like lightning through clouds. Then the mask slid back into place. "Standard vendors," he said smoothly. "Why do you ask?" There it was. One heartbeat of naked terror before the salesman's smile returned. "Guilty. Just catching up on things I missed while Margaret was in hospice." I rose from my chair. "I'll let you get back to work." "Of course." Brent stood too quickly, his movements slightly jerky. "Let me know if you need anything else." I walked out without looking back. The evidence Harvey had provided was damning, but Brent's reaction confirmed everything. He knew about the fabricated vendors. He had processed the payments. And now he knew that I knew. The countdown had begun. As I reached the lobby, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I opened the message. "You're asking the right questions, but you're asking the wrong person. Meet me at Riverside Memorial, Plot 47, tomorrow, 6 a.m. Plot 47, the cemetery where Margaret was buried. Someone wanted to meet me at my wife's grave. Someone who knew exactly what questions I had been asking and exactly where to find me. I stared at the text, my heart pounding. The mysterious caller had been Harvey. Cecil was the investor. Who else was watching? I typed a single reply. "I'll be there." The phone stayed silent. But somewhere across this city, another player had just revealed themselves, and they wanted to meet me among the dead. The cemetery meeting would have to wait until morning. Tonight, I had work to do. Back in my study, I retrieved the ring I had found weeks ago in Corbin's coat. The sapphire stone, the custom setting, the mysterious initials that had been nagging at my memory since the moment I discovered it. I turned the ring under the desk lamp, watching light catch the engraving I had overlooked for weeks. The sapphire caught the lamplight and fractured it into blue fire. White gold band, substantial weight, clearly expensive. This was not costume jewelry purchased on a whim. This was a statement piece, the kind of ring a man gives when he wants to claim something permanently. I pulled a magnifying glass from my desk drawer and examined the interior of the band. 2 letters were engraved in flowing script, partially worn from years of contact with skin. The first letter was clear B. The second was harder to read, either H or K, the curves blurred by time. BK or BH. I photographed the ring from multiple angles and sent the images to an old contact, Martin Ashworth, a retired gemologist who had appraised jewelry for insurance claims on several of my construction projects over the years. If anyone could identify the origin of this piece, it was Martin. Every piece of evidence was a brick, and I was building a prison for everyone who had betrayed me. My phone rang within 20 minutes. "Preston, where did you get this?" Martin's voice carried the excitement of a man who had spotted something rare. "Family matter. Can you identify the maker?" "Ashford and Sterling, Philadelphia's most exclusive jeweler. They've been crafting pieces for mainline families since 1892. I heard papers shuffling on his end. "This design is from their Sapphire collection. Only 12 pieces were ever made in this setting. Can you trace the purchase? They keep meticulous records. Every custom piece has documentation. Martin paused. The engraving, its initials, B.H. I can see it clearly in the high-resolution photo. B.H., not B.K. The second letter was definitely H. Can you find out who purchased it? I know someone at Ashford and Sterling who owes me a favor. Give me an hour. I sat in my study, staring at the ring, while the clock marked time in steady ticks. Outside, January darkness pressed against the windows. Inside, the weight of 16 years of lies pressed against my chest. How many family dinners had Brent attended, raising his glass to toast my son's marriage to the woman he had been sleeping with for years? The phone rang again. Found it, Martin said. The ring was purchased 16 years ago. Custom order, paid in cash. But the jeweler who handled the sale remembers the buyer young professional, expensive taste. Very particular about the engraving. Did he remember a name? No name on the receipt, but he remembered the initials on the order form matched the engraving. B.H. Before I reveal what those initials confirmed, I need to pause. If you're still with me, drop your guess in the comments. Who do you think gave this ring, and why? Because after this, nothing makes sense the same way. Please note what follows contains details dramatized for narrative purposes. The lesson is what matters. 16 years ago, the same year Miles was born. The same year, Brent Holloway joined Mercer Commercial Infrastructure. B.H. Brent Holloway. The ring was not evidence of Corbin's affair with another woman. It was evidence of Sabine's affair with another man. She had kept this ring hidden, a secret token from a lover who had given her not just jewelry, but a child. I set the phone down slowly, my hands steady despite the earthquake inside my chest. Brent had not simply fathered Miles in some moment of weakness. He had given Sabine a custom ring from Philadelphia's most exclusive jeweler. He had invested in their relationship. He had claimed her while she was married to my son. 16 years. Not a mistake, not a moment of weakness. A parallel life running alongside the one I thought I knew. B.H. 2 letters, 16 years. One complete destruction of everything I thought I knew about my family. I thought about every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, every company picnic where Brent had stood beside Sabine while Corbin wandered off to get drinks. Every moment I had attributed to social awkwardness or professional networking had been something else entirely. Every smile had been a secret. Every handshake had been a lie. My CFO had been sleeping with my daughter-in-law for 16 years. He had fathered the boy I believed was my grandson, and he had done it all while sitting in my boardroom, balancing my books, calling me boss. I set the ring down and opened my laptop. If Brent had hidden one secret for 16 years, he had hidden others. Financial records, property holdings, offshore accounts. Everyone had vulnerabilities. Places where careful investigation would reveal the cracks in their carefully constructed facades. By morning, I would know every property he owned, every account he held, every weakness he had tried to bury. The hunter had become the hunted. He just did not know it yet. The investigation into Brent's assets revealed properties in 3 states and accounts in 2 offshore jurisdictions. But I needed more than financial data. I needed legal authority. I picked up my phone and called the one man who seemed to have all the answers. Cecil answered on the first ring, like he had been waiting 40 years for this call. "You know why I'm calling," I said. "I do." His voice carried the weight of decades. "And it's time you knew who I really am." "Then tell me." A long pause. Then a quiet laugh, the kind that holds more sadness than humor. "You really don't recognize me. 40 pounds heavier, and 30 years grayer, but still the same man who stood beside you at your wedding. Who helped you study for the bar exam before you decided law wasn't for you? Who watched you build an empire while I spent my career putting white-collar criminals in prison? The memory hit me like a physical blow. Cecil Harrington. Not just an investor. Not just a mysterious benefactor. My roommate from law school. My best friend before construction consumed my life. The best man at my wedding to Margaret. Cecil, I breathed. My God, it's been 34 years since we last spoke. I've been watching from a distance ever since. Why didn't you just tell me? Because you needed to find the evidence yourself. A prosecutor knows conviction requires the victim to see the crime. If I had handed you documents and accusations, you would have defended your family. You would have made excuses. You had to discover the betrayal on your own. 40 years. He had watched from a distance while my family rotted from the inside, waiting until I was ready to see the truth. You've been a federal prosecutor this whole time. Retired now, but I kept my connections. Pension fraud, securities violations. The conspiracy your family constructed crosses state lines that makes it federal jurisdiction. His voice hardened. I've been building a case file for 3 years, Preston, waiting for you to be ready, waiting for you to ask for help. You want to prosecute my own children? I want to give you a choice your family never gave you. Cecil's tone softened slightly. Corbin, Sabine, Brent, they made their decisions. They committed their crimes. But you still have a choice about what happens next. Justice or silence. Truth or complicity. What kind of friend lets you suffer so you can find your own strength? And what kind of fool was I not to recognize him sooner? Tell me what you need, I said. Your testimony, your cooperation, and your willingness to let the trap spring at exactly the right moment. What trap? The Harrison County bid meeting, Monday morning. They're planning to present the restructuring documents and secure the votes they need to dilute your ownership. Cecil's voice took on the cold precision of a prosecutor laying out his case. Everyone will be in one room, Corbin, Sabine, Brent, on record, committing to the fraud. And then, federal marshals will be positioned outside. The moment they sign those documents, they're committing securities fraud on camera. We arrest them before they leave the building. I sat back in my chair, the phone warm against my ear. 3 days. In 3 days, everything would be over. The conspiracy, the lies. The family I thought I knew. This will destroy them, I said. Not a protest, just a statement of fact. They destroyed themselves. You're just deciding not to go down with them. He was right. I hated that he was right. 2 old friends, Cecil said quietly. One last case. Let's finish what they started. We were not just planning a legal trap. We were 2 old men, remembering who we had been before life complicated everything, and deciding to be those men one last time. Monday, I said. I'll be ready. I know you will. Get some sleep, Preston. The next few days will be long. I hung up and set the phone on my desk. Around me, the evidence of my investigation spread across every surface. Financial records, property deeds, the ring with its damning initials. Monday felt simultaneously too far away and much too close. Footsteps in the hallway. Soft, but deliberate. The study door swung open before I could move to hide the documents. Vivian stood in the doorway in her robe, my daughter's sharp eyes taking in every detail of the scene before her. 40 years old. She had inherited Margaret's intelligence and my stubbornness, a combination that had made her the most successful attorney in her firm and the most difficult child to fool. Who were you talking to? Dad? Her voice was ice. And why do you have Mom's financial files spread across your desk at midnight? I looked at my daughter, at the suspicion in her eyes, at the tension in her shoulders. She had driven down from her apartment in the city. She had not called ahead. She had come to check on me and found something she had not expected. "Vivian," I said carefully, "how much do you know about what your brother has been doing with the company?" Her expression did not change, but something flickered behind her eyes, something that told me she knew more than she had let on. "That depends," she said slowly. "How much do you know?" Vivian and I talked until nearly 2 in the morning. She had suspected something was wrong for months. Numbers that did not add up. Whispered conversations that stopped when she entered rooms. She was not part of the conspiracy. She was like me, one of its intended victims. I told her about Cecil. I told her about Monday. And I asked her to trust me for 3 more days. The hardest lie I ever told was the one that required me to look broken when I had never felt stronger. The next evening, I called Corbin and Sabine to the living room. I had rehearsed every tremor in my voice, every slump of my shoulders, every defeated sigh. The performance had to be perfect. One crack in the facade, and they would suspect. They arrived together. Sabine in a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my first car. Corbin trailing behind her like a shadow. Their eyes were hungry, expectant, the eyes of predators who smelled wounded prey. "I can't fight anymore," I said, letting my voice crack on the last word. "Your mother is gone. The company feels like a burden. What's the point of holding on?" Sabine's face arranged itself into an expression of concern, but her eyes gleamed with barely concealed triumph. "You're making the right choice, Dad. The company needs fresh leadership, someone with the energy to take it forward." "We'll take care of everything," Corbin added. He still would not meet my eyes. "You just need to sign the documents at Monday's meeting. Then you can rest." I played the wounded patriarch so well that for a moment I almost believed it myself, and that scared me more than their scheming ever could. "I'll sign," I said. "Whatever you need. I just want this to be over." Sabine could barely contain herself. She crossed the room and squeezed my shoulder with false comfort, her perfume wrapping around me like a silk noose. "Rest, Dad. We'll handle all the details. You don't have to worry about anything." They left within minutes, footsteps quick with barely suppressed excitement. Sabine was already reaching for her phone as she walked out the door. Brent would know within the hour. The wolves thought they had won. They left me alone in the living room like a carcass they would pick clean tomorrow. They had no idea the carcass had teeth. I sat in the darkness for 20 minutes, letting the silence settle, making sure they were truly gone. Then I walked to my study, closed the door, and waited. The soft knock came at 9:30. Ingrid slipped into the room like a ghost, still in her pajamas, clutching a spiral notebook to her chest. My 12-year-old granddaughter with Margaret's eyes and a secret she had been carrying for months. "Grandpa," she whispered, "I wrote down what they say when they think I'm not listening." I knelt beside her, my heart suddenly too large for my chest. "Sweetheart, you shouldn't have. Grandma told me to watch." Her voice was steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Before she died, she said you'd need a witness." The words hit me like a blow. Margaret. My Margaret. Even dying, she had known. She had seen what I was too blind to see. And she had prepared her own countermeasure. "She told you to document things." Ingrid nodded. "She said people would try to hurt you after she was gone. She said I should write down everything I heard and keep the notebook safe until you were ready." Margaret. Even dying, she had been 3 moves ahead. She had turned our granddaughter into a guardian angel with a spiral notebook. I took the notebook from Ingrid's small hands. The cover was worn from months of handling, the pages filled with careful 12-year-old handwriting. "You're very brave," I told her. "Your grandmother would be so proud of you." "Is it bad?" Ingrid asked. The things I wrote down. I looked at my granddaughter, this child caught between parents who had chosen crime and grandparents who had tried to protect her. And I wished I could spare her what came next. Yes, I said honestly, it's bad. But you did the right thing. She hugged me quickly, fiercely, then slipped back out the door and up the stairs to her room. I listened to her footsteps fade, then carried the notebook to my desk. The first page was dated October 15th, 2 months before Margaret died. In Ingrid's careful handwriting, Mom told Mr. Holloway that Grandpa would be easy to handle once Grandma was gone. She said the hospital visits would keep him distracted while they moved the money. Mr. Holloway said the pension transfer had to happen before Christmas. The dates started before Margaret's death. They had been planning this while she was still alive, while I sat beside her hospital bed, while I held her hand and watched her slip away. They had begun their conspiracy while my wife was dying. I turned the page. More entries, more conversations, more evidence of a betrayal that had been growing in the shadows for months while I remained oblivious. Margaret had seen it. Margaret had prepared for it. And now, from beyond the grave, she was giving me the weapon I needed to end it. I read through Ingrid's notebook until 3 in the morning. Each page another wound. By the time I finished, I had a complete timeline of the conspiracy and a dead wife's fingerprints on the weapon that would destroy it. At dawn, I drove to Cecil's office with the notebook and my remaining questions. How many times can a man's heart break before there is nothing left to shatter? Cecil was waiting with coffee and a folder thick with documents. His expression told me the news would not be gentle. Sit down, he said. There's more. He spread photographs across his desk, images I had never seen, from a time before I became part of the story. College yearbooks, social media archives, event photographs from corporate functions I had never attended. Brent and Sabine met at Penn State, Cecil said. They dated for 3 years. They were engaged when she was 22. I stared at the photographs. Younger versions of faces I knew. Brent with more hair. Sabine with softer features, looking at each other with the unmistakable intimacy of lovers. She broke off the engagement publicly about 6 months before she started dating Corbin. Cecil continued, but the engagement ring you found, she never gave it back. They never actually ended things. They just went underground. She married my son as a cover. She married your son for the name, the money, and the access. Cecil's voice was clinical, a prosecutor laying out evidence. Brent joined the company a year later. They've been living parallel lives ever since. 23 years. Every photograph Cecil showed me was a crime scene I had walked past for decades without seeing the blood. There's something else. Cecil slid a medical record across the desk. This is from Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, dated 30 years ago. I picked up the document, scanning the medical terminology until the relevant words jumped out at me. Corbin Mercer, childhood surgery, complications, sterility confirmed. Corbin has known since he was 14 that he couldn't father children, Cecil said quietly. He knew before he married Sabine. He knew when Miles was born. The room seemed to tilt. My son had known from the beginning that Miles was not his child. He had watched me bond with a grandson he knew was a lie. He had accepted birthday gifts and graduation speeches and family photographs, knowing the entire time. What kind of man agrees to raise another man's child not out of love, but as payment for future theft? He wasn't deceived, I said slowly. He was complicit. More than complicit. Cecil pulled out his phone and scrolled to a series of text messages. These are from 8 years ago. Recovered from a backup server Brent didn't know existed. I took the phone. The messages were between Corbin and Sabine. I know the kid isn't mine. I don't care. Dad's money is worth playing father. And Sabine's response, just keep smiling at family dinners. We'll have everything soon enough. I set the phone down carefully, afraid that if I gripped it any tighter, I would crush it. My son sold his dignity and my trust for an inheritance he was planning to steal anyway. He wasn't a victim of the affair. Preston. He was a business partner in it. Sabine and Brent provided the child the appearance of a legitimate heir, and Corbin provided access to you, to the company, to everything they needed. I had mourned my son as a victim of his wife's manipulation. Now I had to bury him as a co-conspirator, and that grave was deeper than any death. The competency clause, Cecil said, pulling out one final document. This is the restructuring agreement they're planning to present tomorrow. I took the papers and read. The language was dense, deliberately obscured, but Cecil had highlighted the relevant sections. Buried in paragraph 47 was a provision allowing the new board to petition for a competency evaluation of any shareholder over 60 who demonstrates signs of cognitive decline or emotional instability. If you sign this tomorrow, Cecil said, you're not just giving up control of the company, you're giving them the legal mechanism to have you declared mentally unfit. Within 30 days, they could have a judge strip you of all decision-making authority, your assets, your property, your right to contest anything they've done. They weren't just trying to steal the company, I said. They were trying to erase me entirely. The pension theft was preparation. The restructuring is the takeover. And the competency clause is the insurance policy, making sure you can never fight back, even if you figure out what happened. I sat back in my chair, the weight of it all pressing down on me. My son, my daughter-in-law, my CFO. They had constructed a cage so complete that even discovering it would not set me free. The only way out was to spring the trap first. Tomorrow, I said, the bid meeting. Federal marshals will be in position by 8:30. The moment they present those documents, the moment they ask you to sign, they're committing fraud on camera. Cecil leaned forward. You walk in looking defeated. You let them think they've won. And when they hand you the pen, I walk in with a federal warrant. And my family goes to prison. Your family made that choice the moment they decided to steal from you. Cecil's eyes held mine. You're just deciding not to go down with them. 30 days. The number hit me like a physical blow. In 1 month, under that competency clause, I would have no legal standing to challenge anything, no authority over my company, no access to my accounts, no voice in my own life. Sabine had constructed a cage with an expiration date, and the lock would click shut before I even knew I was trapped. Cecil spread 3 documents across my kitchen table, his weathered hands moving with the precision of a man who had built federal cases for 40 years. This is where they made their fatal mistake, he said, tapping the center page. Greed. It always comes back to greed. I leaned forward, studying the document. It was a bid submission for the Harrison County School construction project. $12 million. My company's letterhead. My signature at the bottom. Except I had never signed it. I wasn't even in the state when this bid was submitted, I said, my voice tight. Margaret and I were visiting her sister in Vermont. That was, I calculated quickly. That was 3 years ago. November. Cecil nodded slowly. I know. I pulled the travel records, your flight manifests, your hotel receipts. You were 1,500 miles away when someone walked this bid into the county procurement office. The implications crashed over me in waves. This wasn't just family betrayal. This wasn't just financial manipulation. This was federal crime. Bid rigging on public contracts carried prison sentences. Brent submitted it, I said, the pieces clicking into place. He has signing authority as CFO. He could have... He didn't just submit it. Cecil pulled out another document. A bank statement I had never seen. He inflated the materials costs by 32%. The overage, roughly $3.8 million, was routed through a shell company registered in Delaware. Want to guess who owns that shell company? I didn't need to guess. The answer was written in Cecil's eyes. Sabine. Sabine, he confirmed. Through her maiden name and a series of holding structures that would make a forensic accountant weep. But I've untangled worse in my career. The paper trail is there. Preston. Every penny. My phone buzzed on the counter. I ignored it. The morning light was strengthening through the windows, casting long shadows across the evidence that would destroy my family. Or save me. Perhaps both. The federal marshals, I said slowly. You mentioned positioning. Cecil checked his watch. An old analog piece, the kind nobody wore anymore. They've been in contact with Assistant U.S. Attorney Diane Chen. She's been building a public corruption task force for 18 months, looking for exactly this kind of case. When I reached out through my old contacts, she nearly jumped through the phone. You already reached out? A flash of anger surprised me. Without asking. I asked Margaret. Cecil's voice softened. 15 years ago, when she first suspected something was wrong with the company finances, she asked me to keep an eye on things, to be ready if you ever needed help. He paused. She knew, Preston. Maybe not the details, but she knew something was rotten. The grief hit fresh, unexpected. Margaret. Protecting me even from the grave. Preparing defenses I didn't know I needed against threats I couldn't imagine. The meeting today, Cecil continued, his tone shifting back to tactical. The bid meeting at 10. Sabine will be there. Brent will be there. Corbin. He hesitated. Corbin will be there, I finished. My son. Who helped them forge my signature? Who helped them steal from public school children to line his wife's pockets? The marshals will be in position by 9:30. Plain clothes. 2 in the lobby, 2 in the parking structure. When you give the signal... What signal? Cecil almost smiled. You'll know. A USA Chen wanted something verbal. System that makes clear you're acting under duress, that you're aware of the crimes being committed. Something the surveillance equipment can capture cleanly. Surveillance equipment. Federal marshals. An assistant U.S. attorney building a corruption case around my son and his wife. A week ago, I was a grieving widower counting ceiling tiles at 3 in the morning. Now I was the centerpiece of a federal sting operation. I stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the hardwood. I need to get dressed. The charcoal suit hung in my closet where Margaret had placed it 2 months before she died. She had picked it out for my 60th birthday, still 5 years away. You'll need something distinguished for when you finally step back from the company, she had said, smoothing the lapels. Want something that says you're passing the torch, not being pushed aside. I pulled on the jacket now, adjusting the cuffs. In the mirror, a stranger looked back at me. Older than I expected, harder than I remembered, but not weak. Never weak. The tie I chose was burgundy, Margaret's favorite color. When I walked back into the kitchen, Cecil was on his phone, speaking in low, rapid sentences. He looked up, assessed my transformation, and gave a single approving nod. They're in position, he said. Building security has been quietly briefed. The conference room on the 4th floor is wired. I checked my watch. 9:15. The January sun was fully up now, streaming through the windows of the house I had shared with Margaret for 31 years. The house where we had raised our children. The house where I had been betrayed. 45 minutes until the meeting that would change everything. The boardroom smelled like ambition and expensive lies, my family's favorite perfume. I stepped through the door at exactly 10 o'clock. The charcoal suit Margaret had chosen fitting like armor. The burgundy tie felt like her hand against my chest, steadying me for what came next. Sabine sat at the head of the table, my table, in my company with documents fanned across the mahogany like playing cards in a rigged game. "Dad," she rose with practiced grace, her smile the same one she'd worn at her wedding, the same one she'd worn at Margaret's funeral. "We were worried you might not come." Corbin stood near the window, avoiding my eyes. Brent Holloway positioned himself at Sabine's right hand, exactly where he belonged, her loyal dog, her lover, the father of the child my son had raised as his own. "We've made this easy for you, Dad. Just sign here, here, and here." Sabine slid a gold pen toward me, its weight catching the morning light. "The restructuring protects everyone's interests." Everyone's interests. I picked up the pen, felt its heft. Mont Blanc. Expensive. The kind of pen used to sign away empires. How thoughtful. Brent cleared his throat. "The board has already approved the preliminary terms. This is really just a formality." Preston. A smooth transition. Smooth. I turned the pen in my fingers. Like the Harrison County bid. That was smooth too, wasn't it? Brent. 32% materials inflation. 3.8 million routed through Delaware. The color drained from his face. Sabine's smile flickered but held. "Dad, I don't know what you think you've—" I dropped the pen on the mahogany. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. One syllable, 2 letters. 55 years of building an empire crystallized into the most powerful word I had ever spoken. No. 40. The boardroom door opened behind me. Cecil walked in first, his weathered face calm as stone. Behind him came 4 federal agents in dark suits, 2 men, 2 women, badges already visible on their belts. They moved with the quiet efficiency of people who had done this 100 times before. Sabine Mercer, Brent Holloway. Cecil's voice carried the authority of 4 decades prosecuting federal crimes. "You're under arrest for federal bid fraud, pension theft, and conspiracy to commit financial elder abuse." Sabine's triumph shattered like glass hitting concrete. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound came out. "Dad?" She finally found her voice, and it cracked on the single syllable. "What have you done?" "What you taught me to do." I stepped aside as the agents moved forward. I protected my interests. Brent tried to run. He made it 3 steps before an agent caught his arm and spun him against the wall. The documents scattered all those carefully prepared papers designed to steal my company, my legacy, my life. Now they were evidence. Handcuffs clicked like the final notes of a symphony I had been composing since Margaret's funeral. Sabine stood frozen as an agent read her rights. Her designer suit suddenly looked like a costume, the confident posture crumbling into something small and desperate. She kept looking at Corbin, waiting for him to do something, say something, save her. But Corbin had not moved from the window. I walked toward my son, the boy I had taught to swing a hammer, read blueprints, shake hands like a man who meant what he said. He was 43 years old, and he looked like a child caught stealing. "Dad," his voice broke. "I didn't know it would go this far. Sabine said. I pulled out my phone, opened the message thread Cecil had recovered. "Is that what you'll tell the judge, that Sabine made you do it?" I slid the phone across the table. Corbin looked down at his own words, his own confessions. The messages where he admitted knowing Miles was not his biological son, where he discussed how to use that leverage against Brent, where he calculated exactly how much of my estate he could claim once the competency paperwork went through. You knew. My voice came out steady, though something inside me was dying. From the beginning, you knew, and you traded my grandson for money. You traded your own son for a bigger piece of my corpse. Dad, I can explain. You can explain to the judge. I stepped back as an agent approached. I'm done listening to my children lie. I had raised him, taught him everything I knew about building something that would last, and he had sold me for inheritance money, while his wife spread her legs for my CFO in the house I had paid for. Corbin reached for me as the agents moved in. Dad, please, Ingrid. Think about Ingrid. She's just a kid. She needs... I am thinking about Ingrid. The words came out cold and final. She's the only one in this family who chose to tell the truth. The rest of you can rot. They let him out between Sabine and Brent. 3 people I had loved. 3 people who had conspired to destroy me. The boardroom door closed behind them with a soft click that echoed like a coffin lid. Cecil stood beside me. He did not speak. There was nothing to say. I looked at the scattered documents, the fallen pen, the empty chairs. This was victory. This was justice. This was the company I had built for 55 years. Finally safe from the people who should have protected it. The boardroom fell silent. I stood alone among the wreckage of my family's betrayal. The wreckage surrounded me, scattered documents, overturned coffee cups, the gold pen lying where I had dropped it. I stood in the silence for what felt like hours, but was probably minutes. Then the door opened and they brought Corbin back. He sat across from me like a defendant awaiting sentencing, which, I suppose, he was. The federal agents had separated him from Sabine and Brent, processed his arrest, then released him on his own recognizance, pending trial. Now he slumped in the chair where he had once presented quarterly reports. His tie loosened, his face the color of old newspaper. Dad, his voice cracked. Please, I made mistakes, but I'm still your son. You're out of the company. I kept my voice level, though something was breaking inside me. Out of the will. Out of my life, effective immediately. I was trying to protect the family. You were protecting your inheritance while your wife slept with Brent in the house I paid for. I slid a document across the table. Sign this. Voluntary resignation. It's cleaner than termination for cause, though God knows you've given me grounds for both. Corbin stared at the paper. His hands trembled. All trust access is frozen. Your company credit cards are canceled. Your parking pass has already been deactivated. I paused. You have 30 days to relocate. For Ingrid's sake. She shouldn't lose her home overnight because her parents are criminals. How do you fire your own son? The same way you fire anyone who stole from you, except the paperwork cuts deeper and the wounds never fully close. Dad, Ingrid, is the only reason you're not on the street tonight. I stood. Your daughter had the courage to bring me evidence when everyone else was conspiring against me. She earned those 30 days. You didn't. Corbin signed the resignation with a hand that could barely hold the pen. When he looked up, tears streaked his face. I'm sorry. Save it for the judge. I left him there among the ruins of everything we had built together. The elevator ride down felt like descending into a different life, one where I no longer had a son, only a defendant I was scheduled to testify against. Jefferson University Hospital sat 12 blocks from company headquarters. I drove there in silence. The January sky gray and heavy with threatened snow. The recovery wing smelled of antiseptic and artificial flowers. The kind of aggressive cleanliness that never quite masks the fear underneath. Miles Mercer lay in bed 412, recovering from an appendectomy that had happened while his mother was being arrested for federal crimes. 16 years old, with his father's build and his grandmother's eyes. That was the cruelest part, seeing Margaret in a boy who shared none of our blood. "Grandpa," he sat up straighter when I entered, wincing at the movement. "Mom and Dad haven't answered their phones. Is something wrong?" I pulled a chair beside his bed. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm. Outside the window, the city carried on with its ordinary business, oblivious to the family being dismantled room by room. "Miles, I need to tell you something about your family, about who you are." "Grandpa, what's wrong? You look—" He stopped. The fear in his eyes was the same fear I had seen in Corbin's. But Miles was innocent. Miles had done nothing except be born into a web of lies he never asked to inherit. "Your mother and father have been arrested. Federal charges. They'll be in custody for a while, and when they get out—" I stopped, started again. "When they get out, things will be very different." "Arrested for what?" "Fraud, theft, conspiracy." I took his hand. 16. And I was about to strip away everything he thought he knew. "There's something else, something I learned that you have a right to know," I told him. "Brent Holloway. The affair that predated his birth, the DNA results that proved what Sabine had hidden for 16 years. I watched his face transform from confusion to disbelief to something that looked like his whole world cracking down the middle. "So I'm nobody." His voice was barely a whisper. "I'm not even a Mercer." "You're whoever you choose to become. That's more than most people get." I squeezed his hand. "The company won't be your inheritance. The trust funds are being restructured, but I'll pay for 1 year of college. A foundation, not a fortune. After that, you build your own path. 1 year. 1 year. What you do with it determines everything that comes after." He stared at the ceiling. The monitors kept beeping. Somewhere down the hall, a nurse laughed at something, the sound jarring against the weight of what I had just done to a 16-year-old boy. I had given him 1 year and the truth. Whether that was mercy or cruelty, I still do not know. "Grandpa," Miles's voice stopped me at the door. "Did you ever love me, or was I always just a mistake to you?" The question hit harder than anything Corbin or Sabine had thrown at me. "I loved the boy I thought you were," I said finally. "And I hope I can learn to love whoever you become. But that's a road we'll have to walk together, if you're willing." I left before he could answer. In the hallway, my phone buzzed. A text from Vivian. "We need to talk. I'm at Mom's grave. Come alone." My daughter, the one family member I had not yet confronted. The one whose allegiances remained unclear. Vivian had been an ally. That January afternoon at Margaret's grave, my daughter had shown me her own evidence file. Documents she had gathered as an attorney. Suspicions she had harbored for years. We had embraced beside her mother's headstone while the winter wind cut through our coats, and I had wept for the first time since the funeral. 5 months later, I watched Sabine in an orange jumpsuit and realized I felt nothing at all. The James A. Byrne Federal Courthouse had marble floors that echoed with every footstep, wood paneling polished to a mirror's shine, and the peculiar hush of a place where lives were measured and sentenced. I sat in the 3rd row behind the prosecution table as Judge Harold Whitmore, a 72-year-old federal jurist with 40 years on the bench, delivered the verdict. The defendants showed a calculated disregard for 340 working families who trusted them. His voice carried the weight of decades. "This court finds Sabine Mercer guilty on all counts of wire fraud and conspiracy. Sentenced 12 years federal custody." Sabine stood motionless. The woman who had orchestrated my destruction, who had slept with my CFO while plotting to steal my company, who had forged my signature on federal bid documents. She did not cry. She did not protest. She stared straight ahead like a mannequin waiting to be stored. Brent Holloway, guilty on all counts of bid manipulation, pension theft, and conspiracy. Sentence, 15 years federal custody. The courtroom felt like a funeral where the corpses could still blink. Sabine's eyes were dead long before the sentence was read. Whatever fire had driven her ambition had burned out somewhere between the arrest and this moment, leaving only ash. 12 years. 15 years. Numbers that should have felt like victory. Instead, they felt like arithmetic. Neither of them looked at me as the marshals led them away. I suppose there was nothing left to say. The trial had lasted 3 weeks. The evidence overwhelming. Cecil's documentation, Ingrid's recordings, the paper trail through Delaware shell companies that had built a case so airtight that even their expensive lawyers could only negotiate for shorter sentences rather than acquittal. I drove back to Mercer Commercial Infrastructure headquarters with the June sun warming my windshield and an emptiness in my chest that I could not name. Justice had been served. The guilty had been punished. So why did I feel like I had lost something I could never recover? The warehouse floor was full when I arrived. 340 workers had gathered, at my request, electricians, plumbers, concrete specialists, project managers, the men and women who had built this company with their hands, while others tried to steal their futures. Hard hats lined the folding tables. Steel-toed boots scuffed the concrete. The smell of machine oil and honest sweat filled the cavernous space. I stepped onto the small platform we used for safety briefings and looked out at their faces. Some had worked for me for 30 years. Others were young enough to be my grandchildren. All of them had been victims of the same conspiracy that had targeted me. What is $7.2 million to me? A line on a spreadsheet. To them, the difference between dignity and despair in their final years. The people who stole from you are going to prison, I said. But that's not why I called you here. I paused. 340 faces waited. Your pension fund has been fully restored. Every dollar that was stolen has been returned. With interest. The federal government seized the assets, and I personally covered the gap to make you whole immediately rather than waiting for the courts. Silence. Then a murmur spreading through the crowd like wind through wheat. They stole from you while you built schools and hospitals, while you poured foundations and ran electrical lines and created things that will outlast all of us. Every dollar has been returned because you earned it. This company was built by your hands. It belongs to your futures, not to the greed of people who never lifted a hammer. The applause started somewhere in the back and rolled forward like thunder. Men who had poured concrete for decades were wiping their eyes. A woman in a hard hat was openly crying. The sound echoed off the warehouse walls, filling the space with something I had not felt in months. Afterward, they lined up to shake my hand, calloused palms gripping mine, voices rough with emotion. Mr. Mercer, my wife cried when I told her. Thank you. Thank yourself, I said. You earned every cent. I just made sure it stayed yours. For the first time since Margaret died, I felt something that was not anger or grief. It felt like purpose, like the reason I had built this company in the first place. Not for wealth, not for legacy, but for the people who showed up every day and turned blueprints into buildings. As the workers filed out, Harvey Pemberton approached with a folder in his weathered hands. The 71-year-old retired accountant who had helped Cecil build the federal case now stood before me with an expression I could not read. "There's one more thing," he said quietly. "Margaret left something for you. Her lawyer held it until the case was resolved." He handed me the folder. "She knew, Preston. She knew everything, and she left you instructions." Harvey's folder sat on my desk beside the investigator's envelope. 2 documents from 2 different sources, both containing truths I had asked for but was not certain I wanted to receive. I set Margaret's letter aside. That one required courage I did not yet possess, and opened the investigator's report first. The photographs spilled across my desk like evidence at a trial that had already concluded. Corbin stood behind a counter at a hardware store in Reading, Pennsylvania, wearing a red apron with a name tag pinned to his chest. His hair had grown longer, shaggier than the executive cut he had maintained for 20 years. His face looked thinner. The photograph captured him mid-motion, reaching for something on a high shelf, the ordinary gesture of an ordinary employee doing ordinary work. My son. The man who had expected to inherit a construction empire worth $38 million. Now he stocked shelves and counted inventory for $12 an hour. I studied the next photograph. His apartment building, a 3-story brick structure with peeling paint and a parking lot full of cars that had seen better decades. His unit was on the 2nd floor. The investigator had noted the rent, $800 a month, utilities included. The same amount Corbin used to spend on a single dinner when Sabine wanted to impress her friends. $12 an hour. I remembered when his allowance was more than that. The report continued in clinical detail. Corbin worked the morning shift, 6 to 2. He drove a 12-year-old Honda Civic with a dent in the rear bumper and a crack in the windshield. His co-workers knew him only as Corbin. No last name, no history. No mention of the federal trial that had made headlines 6 months earlier. He had reinvented himself as a nobody, which was perhaps the only honest thing he had ever done. Ingrid visited on weekends. The investigator had photographed her walking into Corbin's apartment building with a backpack slung over her shoulder. 12 years old, and still loyal to the father who had betrayed everyone else. I could not fault her for that. Children are supposed to love their parents, even when their parents do not deserve it. I set down the photographs and leaned back in my chair. The study smelled of old leather and older books, the accumulated weight of decades spent building something that my own son had tried to steal. Through the window, the June afternoon cast long shadows across the lawn Margaret and I had designed together, the garden she would never walk through again. Is this justice or tragedy? Perhaps they are the same thing when family is involved. Corbin had everything stripped away, exactly as I had promised. No inheritance, no trust funds, no company position, no family connections that could open doors or smooth paths. He had exactly what he had earned through his own choices, a minimum wage job and a cramped apartment, and the knowledge that the father who raised him could no longer bear to look at his face. The investigator's final note mentioned that Corbin had applied for a community college program in business administration, night classes, 2 evenings a week. He was trying to rebuild, starting from nothing. I did not know how to feel about that. Part of me wanted to see him suffer forever the cold. Wounded part that remembered his messages, his calculations, his willing participation in Sabine's conspiracy. He had known about Brent. He had known about the forged signatures. He had sat at my table and eaten my food and called me Dad, while plotting to have me declared incompetent and locked away. But another part of me, the part that remembered teaching him to ride a bicycle, that remembered his face when he graduated college, that remembered the boy before the man, betrayed me. That part felt something I could not name. Not forgiveness, not yet. Perhaps never. But something. Margaret would have cried for him. She would have found some way to separate the crime from the criminal, to hold on to hope for redemption, even when evidence argued against it. She had that gift, the ability to love people not for who they were, but for who they might become. I cannot. The man who raised Corbin died the day I read those messages. What remains is someone colder, someone who weighs betrayal against consequence and finds the scales balanced, but the victory hollow. I should feel something: triumph, sorrow, regret. Instead, there is only the cold clarity of accounts finely balanced. I closed the folder and set it aside. Everything was where it belonged now. Sabine in prison, Brent in prison, Corbin stripped of everything he had schemed to steal. The pension fund restored, the company protected, the workers secure. That would have to be enough. I reached for Margaret's letter, the envelope Harvey had delivered from her lawyer, held in trust until the case was resolved. Her handwriting on the front, the familiar loops and curves I'd seen on grocery lists and birthday cards, and notes left on my pillow. For Preston, when the truth is finally known. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Even in death, my wife had one more thing to tell me. Even in death, she was still protecting me, still guiding me, still loving me in ways I was only beginning to understand. Margaret's letter had answered every question except the one that mattered most. What do I do with what remains? She had known. For 2 years before her death, she had known about Sabine's affair, about Brent's embezzlement, about Corbin's complicity. She had gathered evidence quietly, strategically, entrusting pieces to Harvey and Cecil and even young Ingrid, all of them waiting for the moment when I would be ready to see what she had seen. Her final act of love was not protecting me from the truth. It was ensuring I would discover it only when I was strong enough to act. Now, standing on the rooftop of Mercer Commercial Infrastructure, with Cecil beside me, I signed the documents that would transform betrayal into legacy. "You're giving away everything you built," Cecil said, watching my pen move across the pages. "I'm returning it to everyone who helped me build it." I initialed the final clause. There's a difference. Half my wealth would become the Margaret Mercer Scholarship Fund, full rides for first-generation engineering students who could not otherwise afford the education that had changed my life. The rest would fund an employee stock ownership program, transferring controlling interest to the workers who had poured foundations and run electrical lines and built something real with their hands. The company would no longer bear my name in the ways that mattered, but it would carry forward the values Margaret and I had believed in when we started with nothing but ambition and each other. I had spent 55 years building an empire from concrete and steel. Today I learned that real foundations are built from trust. "Margaret would be proud," Cecil said quietly. Margaret orchestrated this. I looked out at the Philadelphia skyline, the buildings I had helped construct rising against the July afternoon. She knew I'd need something to do with the anger once the fighting was over. She gave me this. The summer wind carried the scent of warm asphalt and distant river water. Somewhere below, 340 workers continued their ordinary day, unaware that their futures had just been secured by documents signed on a rooftop above their heads. That evening, I found Ingrid in the estate garden. She sat on the stone bench where Margaret used to read, her 12-year-old face serious in the fading light. The roses Margaret had planted years ago bloomed around her in shades of pink and white, their fragrance heavy in the summer air. "Grandpa," she looked up as I approached. "Mom said you wanted to see me." Vivian had brought her, then left us alone. My daughter understood that some conversations required privacy. I sat beside Ingrid and placed the notebook in her hands. The binding was worn soft from 40 years of use, the pages dog-eared and marked with pencil calculations that had once seemed so important. My first engineering notebook. Every building I had ever designed started in those pages. "Why me, Grandpa?" Ingrid held the notebook like it was sacred. Maybe it was. Maybe the only sacred things are the ones we pass to those who deserve them. Because you're the only one who understood that honesty is the foundation everything else stands on. I watched her turn the yellowed pages, her eyes tracing the sketches and equations. Your father chose money. Your mother chose deception. You chose truth, even when it cost you everything. I was scared, she admitted. When I gave you that notebook with the recordings, I thought you might hate me for telling. I could never hate you for being honest. I put my arm around her shoulders. That notebook is yours now. Whatever you build in your life, start it there. And remember, foundations matter more than what stands on top of them. She leaned against me, and for a moment, I felt something I had not felt in months. Hope. Not for myself, my chapters were largely written, but for her, for what she might become, for the buildings she might design, and the people she might help. Later, alone in my study, I looked at Margaret's photograph. Her eyes smiled at me from the silver frame, the same smile I had fallen in love with 56 years ago. She had known everything. She had seen our son's corruption, and our daughter-in-law's betrayal, and our CFO's theft. And rather than burden me with knowledge I was not ready to bear, she had planted seeds. Harvey, Cecil, Ingrid's courage, all of it cultivated in silence, waiting for the harvest. You knew, Margaret. You always knew. And you made sure I'd find out only when I was strong enough to act. A foundation built on lies cannot stand. She had taught me that, even in death. For the first time since her funeral, I breathed without weight on my chest. The accounts were balanced. The foundation was true. The company belonged to those who had earned it, and the legacy would continue through truth rather than blood. I set her photograph back on the desk and walked to the window. Philadelphia's skyline glittered with buildings I had helped construct. Schools, hospitals, homes. My name might fade from boardrooms and bank accounts, but somewhere out there, a scholarship student would learn to build. Somewhere, a worker would own a piece of the company they had devoted their life to. Somewhere, a 12-year-old girl would open a worn notebook and dream, and that was enough. That was everything. And to you listening to my story, remember this. I spent 55 years building an empire, but I almost lost everything because I trusted without verifying. I loved my family blindly. I assumed loyalty was given, not earned. Do not make my mistake. Watch the ones closest to you, not with suspicion, but with awareness. The people who can hurt you most are the ones you let inside. This family story taught me that foundations matter, not just in construction, but in life. A foundation built on lies will always crumble, but a foundation built on truth can hold anything. I believe God put me through this drama story for a reason. Perhaps so you could learn from my life story without living it yourself. What began as a true story of betrayal became a revenge story of justice. Every family story has heartbreak. Every drama story has a turning point. This true story was mine. If this life story moved you, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done in my position? Would you have fought back or walked away? If you know someone who needs to hear this revenge story, please share it with them. And if you want more true stories like this, more drama stories, more family stories with real lessons, please subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Thank you for staying until the very end of my story. Your time means everything to me. Remember, some details in this true story have been adjusted for storytelling and privacy. Any resemblance to real individuals is purely coincidental. What matters most is the message, and I hope it stays with you. God bless.